Employment fell drastically in January at an annualized rate of 3.2%. That translates to over 51,000 job losses. And joining us in studio now to discuss the January Adcorp Employment Index numbers is Loane Sharp. He's a labour market analyst at Adcorp. Loane, thanks so much for joining us. Unfortunately, not on a very good note. We've got very disappointing numbers filtering through. To what extent has this come through as a negative surprise for you?
It was a surprise. We were expecting, during much of last year, we observed the retail and financial services sectors were adding employment quite significantly. And every indication was that the retailers would have a bumper season in December and January. But it looks like the December retail season was a disappointment. These figures are seasonally adjusted, so the decline in employment in retail is more than simply laying off workers who were employed temporarily in December. It's unfortunate. It remains to be seen to what extent this is indicative of weakness in the economy generally. We've got retail sales figures due this week telling us about December, but I expect those figures will be a little softer in light of these employment indicators.
Loane, it's a bit of a kick in the teeth, isn't it? Because I was saying to Alishia before the show that you have been quite vitriolic in your, not abuse, but in your comments towards labour and employment matters in South Africa, directed at various institutions, shall we call them. But you seem to sort of thaw a bit in December with a few jobs being created, and it was a step in the right direction. This is a step in the wrong direction. If you look at the employment by sector, mining down 17 and a bit percent, and then wholesale and retail trade down nearly 9%. Is that the retailers, when you go to the wholesale and retail trade figure, is that retailers that took people on in December and said, well, it wasn't quite as good, so we're going to have to dump you now?
Yeah, I think there might be an unpleasant surprise in the retail sales figures for December. I think that's exactly what's happened. There was a tremendous amount of buoyancy from the consumer during the latter half of last year. You saw it in the ratings of retail shares and also to some extent in earnings. Earnings have been a little disappointing of retailers, and employment too for the last month. But it's too early to say that this is a trend. Some figures, retail sales figures, motor vehicle sales, narrow monetary base, all of these indicate that the core consumer in South Africa is doing relatively well, or certainly spending up a storm. So I don't expect that these soft retail employment figures will be sustained. And I think we might see a reversal next month.
Of course, what these employment figures do is it also tells of just how much less we've got Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan having to work with come budget, and come, putting that budget together for 2013. I mean, let's talk around implications in that regard.
Well, one of the things we looked at in this month's report was the extent of income tax evasion in South Africa. Bear in mind that 1% of taxpayers pay 24% of all income taxes. So there's a very skewed incidence in South Africa, and there's a tremendous economic incentive for high income earners to evade taxes in one way or another. They can do so, for example, by incorporating themselves as business entities rather than being personal individual income taxpayers. And there are many other techniques that they can utilize. Our calculations suggest that 30% of incomes go unreported to the authorities, not only SARS but also Stats SA and others. So it's fascinating to imagine what the income tax picture will look like in the budget. If there is an increase in personal income tax rates, particularly for high earners, I think we're going to see an acceleration of income tax evasion. The way to avoid not only income tax evasion, but all of the things that are driving informal sector activity in South Africa, labour laws and regulations and high income taxes for mobile individuals are driving growth of informal activity. So I think the Minister of Finance has got very few options in the upcoming budget to raise taxes at all.
The other thing that's on the horizon is the State of the Nation address coming up later this week from President Zuma. Now, it's very much a cosmetic thing. He stands up and talks and everything. But on the other hand, it's quite important. The tone of that speech will be quite important. And obviously job creation rather, will be hopefully the keynote part of that speech.
You know, job creation has now been the government's #1 priority since 2009. It's been an extraordinary failure for reasons that I think are well understood. We know the economy needs to grow 4% per annum just to absorb the 500,000 school leavers who search for work every year. And the economy, by our calculations, needs to grow 9% per annum to make any substantial inroads into the unemployment rate that we have. So neither of those growth prospects are on the horizon. So I think unemployment is going to be with us for a long time. But government is extraordinarily able to patch over these dilemmas. We heard the Minister of Mines, Mineral Resources last week talking about what a spectacular success the mining industry has been. She glossed over the fact that mining employment has fallen from 1.4 million in 1994 to just 520,000 today. So I wouldn't underestimate the President's ability to patch over what are really very deep chasms in the economy.